Karnataka, ICOG, accredited by ISAR and Aspire. She is the member of International Reproductive Medicine Research Network. Madam has written several papers, chapters in multiple books, and she has had publications in multiple national and international journals. So on to you, madam. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and enlightening us about these two very important and difficult topics. This is something which no one has ever done. And I will be muting myself and start with the presentation, madam.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sachin. Yes, I mean, yesterday some of the delegates wanted me to talk on the receivers operating characteristic curve, that is the ROC curve. And basically, this is used only for the diagnostic test. So what is it? It's a plot of the true positive rate against the false positive rate for different possible cutoffs of a diagnostic test. And the ROC are frequently used to show in graphical way the connection between the clinical sensitivity and the specificity of every possible cutoff for a test or a combination test. So you can see this x-axis will have the specificity or the false positive, whereas the y-axis will have the sensitivity or the true positive. And then we plot the curve, and this is the area under the curve. So I will also show you how would we do it. So basically you can divide it like into this. You can have true positive and false negative in all the cases which have disease, and then you have false positive and true negative in all patients who do not have the disease. So we can divide it into A, B, C, and D. And then how do we test the sensitivity? So that is A, which is divided by A plus C, and that is the fraction of true positives to all diseases. And the specificity is D by B plus D, and that is the fraction of true negatives to all those without the disease. So how do you do? Now I've taken this example. So we have these patients, we've taken the T4 values and we have divided them into four parts. And then we have taken those who are hypothyroid and those who are euthyroid and what the levels are. So then how do we calculate the true positives and this thing? So if you take a cutoff of 7, then the true positives basically are 18 plus 7, that is 25. The false negatives are 7 and the total is 32. And similarly over here, the false positive is 18 and the true negatives are 75 and all without disease are 93. And from this then we calculate the true positive and the false positive at cutoff of 5, 7 and 9. And that is also the sense. And then we also calculate the specificity and sensitivity. And then we plot it over this graph and you can see the 5, for the 5, the cutoff is over here, for 7 and 9, the sensitivity and the specificity in that particular range. So this is the ROC curve for a patient, for a patient where we have tested the T4 values and we have divided them into 3 cutoff points. And we've seen which is the most sensitive one over here. And then if you want to compare 3 different tests, so you can plot all the 3 different tests, and then we need to look at the area of the curve. So the one which is highest basically has got the best sensitivity and specificity. The one in the middle has got a good, whereas if it's a straight line, basically there is no use of this particular test. So sometimes you can have an ROC curve which is like that is a perfect one. And basically it is, you can able to distinguish between the positive and the negative cases very, very well. If you have something like this and where it is around 0.7, so here 70% of the chance, so there's a 70% chance that the test will be able to distinguish between positive class as well as the negative class. And if it is 0.5, that is it's right at the center, this model has no discrimination capacity to distinguish between positive class and a negative class. So if anybody has questions on this ROC, I will answer here. Otherwise, I'll go to the post-hoc test. If it's understood by everybody, I'll go to the post-hocs. So when we talk about the post-hoc test, so any research paper, whenever you're writing, so you have to have a primary outcome and you have to have a secondary outcome. So basically, and you have to have, for the primary outcome, you have to have the statistics being performed based upon the predefined statistical plan, where we have to do the sample size calculation. We have to do the planning for the allocation, whether it's a non-inferiority versus a superiority trial, and the type of statistical test that will be carried out to answer the questions, like you have the regression analysis as well as the p-value. And then we also have certain secondary outcomes. So it has been seen many times that you've done so much of work, and then when we look back at our data set, we find that there is no significance what has happened, or nothing can be proved in your primary outcome. So then what we do is probably, and when you are analyzing the other data, or when you're doing the population analysis, you find that there is something which has turned out to be positive. So this is then called as a post hoc analysis. That is, it is analysis in the hindsight that was not planned before the data was seen. And here what we are looking at is an secondary outcome measure, and which is similar or closely related to the primary outcome measure, which has occurred or which has not occurred. So your primary outcome measure may or may not be positive or negative. But along with that, when you have certain other positive findings, these are the secondary outcomes, and this is then caused because we are not planned for this analysis earlier, and therefore it is caused as a post hoc analysis. So basically, what is it? It is a study which have failed to find significant difference in a primary outcome measure can be reanalyzed using post hoc analysis to see if a secondary outcome has occurred or not, and whether there is any statistical significance to this that can be used to salvage the study. So basically, the results from a post hoc analysis should always be paired with the power of the study to find the difference. And if the power is more than 80% to find the difference in the secondary outcomes, even in a post hoc analysis, this makes the results much more statistically robust, and therefore it is reliable. Therefore, the power of the study to analyze the secondary outcomes should always be reported and is the critical metric based on which the credibility of the post hoc analysis should be interpreted. Fine. So then I'll go to today's topic, and that is how do we write a scientific paper, and what are the causes, what are the reasons for the rejection of a paper. So we know that we can publish several types of articles in the academic journals. They could be original articles, they could be review articles, it could be case studies, technical reports, opinion articles, a letter to the editor. We also have certain journals which publish the conference proceedings, their data papers, as well as the clinical trials. So it is very important for us to choose the type of study. So the preferred studies basically are the prospective cohort studies, the prospective randomized control trials, systemic reviews, and the meta-analysis. And mostly we should avoid a historic cohort study, a retrospective non-randomized study, a retrospective case study, systemic review, and meta-analysis, which are all dependent on the retrospective data. So when we have to write a manuscript, we have to answer 4 important questions. So why did you start? That is, which will include basically the introduction, the background, the literature search, what you have done, as well as the hypothesis. Then the second point that has to be answered in your manuscript is, what did you do? That is the methodology section. Then what did you find? That is the result section. And what does it mean? And that is the discussion session. And probably it's best to have a separate conclusion section, because the conclusion session should only give importance to your results. Whereas in a discussion session, what we can do is we can compare our results with the other published studies earlier. So then what are the characteristics of an original research article? It includes a hypothesis, research question, background study, methods, results, and the interpretation, discussion, and conclusion. It has a definite structure. It interprets the research findings and discusses possible implications. It reports the research findings, and it is written by the researcher who has actually conducted the study. So the most important studies when you want to write a paper is, first is you have to choose the right research question as to what you want to study. And then we need to do a literature search. Then we need to check for the feasibility of whatever idea we have got. Then we need to identify the correct problem in your area of interest, identify the research gaps and think about the problem gaps that can happen when you're going to do this research. And after completing your research, you have to structure your research article, format your paper after you checked the author guidelines of your target journal. So this is also very, very important, because if you just send it in any way to any journal, therefore it's very important for us to read the instruction to the authors to whichever journal you're going to submit your publication to. So how is the structure of an article? So you should have a title which should be attractive and informative. You have to give the information about the authors. The abstract has to be structured. You have to give relevant keywords. Introduction should provide sufficient background about your work. The literature review, whatever is relevant, should be written. Then the methods should include details of all the experiments that have been conducted. The results should answer the questions you raised in the introduction. The discussion should compare your result with other studies, and the conclusion should include your findings. References should list every source you've taken, and acknowledgement also is very important to include all sources of support, as well as financial support also if you have received any. The footnote should mention necessary additional information, and the appendix should include all the additional data. And the other thing what should be included in your article is the tables, figures, and the graph. So title is the most important thing, because that is the first thing which everybody is going to read. It is important in literature searching. The fewest possible words that adequately indicate the content of the paper should be used. Should not include extra words such as a study of or observations on. It should be specific enough, and generally should not include any abbreviations. Coming to the authorship, you have to have substantial contribution to the conception or the design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work, drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content, final approval of the version to be published, and there should be an agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved, often listed from the greatest contribution to the least, irrespective of the academic status. And also, it's important to mention the institutional affiliation of each author and give the contact details only of the corresponding author. Then the other part of that is your keywords. So you have to have at least 3 to 10 keywords which are selected either from the title or from the abstract. The abstract again is the most important part, because many a times a reader is just going to read the abstract, and if he finds that the abstract is interesting, then only he is going to go ahead and read the entire text. So therefore, your abstract is going to persuade the reader to see the full text, to help the reader decide if the article is relevant for their purpose, and to answer a call of papers in a conference to make it possible for your piece of research to appear in an online publication database. So what is an abstract? It is a very concise statement of the major elements of your research project. It states the purpose, methods, and findings of your research project. An abstract is condensed version of a full scientific paper, and usually it is between 150 to 250 words. The font size is always different, you can see, and even the type of lettering what is used is different from the main text, and it is basically in a single paragraph, and it is usually seen at the beginning of the paper, and it helps you present complex information in a clear, concise manner, and it should be readable, well organized, and flow smoothly between the different parts. So basically it is then the essence of the whole paper. It covers all the academic elements, which include the background, that is the purpose and the focus, the methodology, the results, finding, conclusion, and recommendations, and summarizes briefly the whole paper, including the conclusion. So you have made a different type of abstract. One is a descriptive, and another is an informative type of abstract. So what we use normally is an informative abstract, where where we have to talk about what is the text about, the issues of the problems explored, the purpose, the results, the conclusion and recommendations, and a return after a project has been completed, and emphasis is basically placed on the results and conclusion. Whereas a descriptive, it's almost same till over here, but then it is written before the project is completed, and it emphasizes is placed on the problems and methods they may be required for a conference paper proposals or for a progress. Basically, the work is being abstracted. So an abstract of a scientific research paper will contain elements not found in an abstract of a literature article and the vice versa. And all abstracts share several mandatory components. So you have again two types of abstracts. One is structured and the other is unstructured. So all are original papers. Then you take your systematic reviews, meta-analysis, all have to be structured. And it is according to the MARAD pattern, that is the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And all are on, as I told you, they are all abstracts of the original articles. So unstructured basically is does not comply with the MARD, and basically unstructured abstracts are used only for case reports. So then what do you include in an abstract? One is the reason for writing, that is what problem does this work attempt to solve? What is the scope of the project? What is the main argument or what you're going to be answering? Then we need to look at the methodology, which may include specific models or approaches used, may describe the type of evidence used in the research, and explain how data was collected, analyzed, and interpreted. The results have to have the specific data that indicates the results of the project and may discuss the finding in a more general way. And the fourth point is the implications and the conclusion. That is, what changes should be implemented as a result of the finding of the work, and how does this work add to the body of the knowledge on that particular topic. And then you have to give the keywords. So what should not be included is again very important. So information not contained in the original work, references to others' work, quotations from the original work or other works, lengthy explanation of words and concepts, and unexplained acronyms or abbreviations, and tables and maps from somebody else's presentation should not be included in your abstract. So the key information needed for a structured abstract, when you talk about the objective, it has to be.
So because of that, we thought that we must go in a different path.
Level of the clinic care, the patients or the participants, that is the manner of selection and the number of patients or the participants who entered and completed the study, interventions like the exact treatment or intervention, what was given for the study, the main outcome measures, which is the primary study outcome measured as planned before data collection begins, results, and these should be the key findings what you have got after your study, and the conclusion, which should include the key conclusion, including direct clinical application. So what are the guidelines for abstract of a review article? That is for an original article. So in a review article, you have to see the purpose, that is what is the primary objective of the review. Then data identification, that is identification assessment of the data sources. Study selection is the number of studies selected for review and how they were selected. Data extraction, that is the type of guidelines used abstracting data and how they were applied. Result of data synthesis and the method of data synthesis and key results. And conclusion should include the key conclusions, the including potential applications, and the research needs after this review was read. So for example, I have given you here, so if you want to study the day 5 embryo transfer, prefer to day 3 embryo transfer. So it basically, you have to write what type of design, and it has to be an RCT. Then because you should not have any confounding factors, you should not do few IVF and few ICSI, so you should do all ICSI. The primary endpoint should be a pregnancy rate, and then you have to publish your results. So here we can see that probably there was a 15% increase in the pregnancy rates after a day 5 embryo transfer was done. And therefore, you conclude that day 5 transfers are much better, and then you give the references for it. So this is how an abstract design should be there. Then we go to the main text. So you have the introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So basically, you have to see that the introduction has to be short. Your material and methods should be long. That is, what you have done should be long. And your results also should be long. And then should include a comparison between your studies as well as the other studies. So in an introduction, the first paragraph should deal with topic of the paper. So that should be the main part. Then your middle paragraph will deal with the literature review, and the final paragraph will deal with the justification and the roadmap, that what is your take-home message, what you want to study in your research. So what is the purpose of introduction? Basically, it is to provide background of the study in order to help readers understand the paper, in order to help readers appreciate the importance of the research, and to identify the questions the research is addressing. So the content should have information on importance of the topic, the highlights of the relevant previous research, identification of what is lacking in the current knowledge, approach you use to fill the gaps in the knowledge, and in some cases, the main findings. The literature review should be short, basically in the introduction, and at times some people always put it separately, but most of us usually have it in the introduction itself. It's not a comprehensive review of literature, and only a few major papers should be used. And we need to probably use the primary source, mostly use past tense, arranged mostly in chronological order, make logical connections between the studies, and sometimes a summary table is useful for comparing the studies which you are going to compare your studies with. Then coming to the material and methods. So the purpose of this is to allow others to replicate what you have done in order to test it, in order to do further research, to follow, to allow others to evaluate what you did, to determine whether the conclusion seems valid, and to determine whether the findings seem applicable to other situations. And what are the contents that need to be there? You have to describe the context as well as the setting of the study, specify the study design, describe the population, that is the patient, doctors, hospital, etc. Describe the sampling strategy, describe the intervention if applicable, identify the main study variables, describe the data collection instruments and procedures, and outline the data analysis methods, and also give what is the statistical analysis you're going to do. So this is, I have taken 2 slides from Dr. Mohan Kamath. Because I thought I'll discuss with you all how to calculate the sample size. So basically, when we need to calculate the sample size, we need to have difference in the response rate and estimate of the response rate of one of the groups. And then we have the level of statistical significance, the power, and whether it is one-sided or two-sided. So if you take in the study, so you have a response rate of one drug, that is, suppose we're talking about an ovulation induction drug, and we take letrozole. And suppose the response rate, that is the ovulation induction rate, is 60%, and when you're giving a placebo, it is 10%. So what is the effect size? It is 60 minus 10, and that is 50%. So what you basically need to give the statistician is this, and it is basically a two-sided test. And usually the power is set to about 80%, and the alpha is usually 0.05. So I've taken an example, and this is the formula what you use, where N is the population size, Z is the critical value of the normal distribution at a required confidence interval, P is the sample proportion, and E is the margin of error. So now I've taken an example of an IUI cycle. So we will compare A versus B. So A is a live birth rate of controls, wherein you are having patients where you've done ovulation induction without GnRH antagonist with a live birth rate of 10%. And now you want to try what is the difference if you're using antagonist, and we are presuming that the live birth rate will increase to 20%, which is the effect size. So so what happens happens, so normally sometimes if you don't know the population size, what they say is it really does not make a difference. So you can take it as 1 lakh patients. Then the critical value basically at 95% confidence interval, which we normally use, is Z, and that is 1.96. Then the margin of error is 0.1 here, because we know that there is a difference of 10 over here. The sample proportion, when we do not know, when it is uncertain, as I said, that you can just take it as 0.5. But if you have calculated from previous studies or pilot studies, then you can use the sample proportion P if you have them. So here it is 10. So therefore it becomes a 1 over here. And then the sample. So basically there are certain amounts of detail that we also need to use. And this includes for well-known methods like well known. You have to give a brief description of the method and citation of the reference. And for methods that you yourself have devised, you have to give a relatively detailed description in the material and methods. Then coming to the results, and this is basically the core of the paper. And the reports, we have to report on the data collection as well as the recruitment. Describe the participants about their demography, their clinical conditions, and any other factor if present. And then we have to then present the key findings with respect to the central research question, that is the primary outcome. And then if present, secondary findings, that is the secondary outcome or subgroup analysis, what if at all we do post hoc. Often, and it's best to include the tables and figures, should present results but not comment on them, and should be verb past tense, and should be presented in a verb past tense. So when we talk about the tables and figures, we have to know that how much information in the text should overlap that in the tables and figures. So whatever the tables and figures are there, whether we have to totally describe it in the text or not, this is what we have to know. So it's very important to see that we should not have an extensive overlap. In general, the text should present only the main points from the tables and figures, also include a few of the most important data. Details should be clear from the table or figure, and we have to remember to mention every table and figure in the text. So every figure and table in the text has to be cited in the text. This is very, very important, because many times we get papers wherein they have given almost 10 tables and figures, but only 4 of them have been cited. So this type of a paper cannot be accepted for publication. So what are the common mistakes we make? One is illogical sequence of data presentation. It could be an inaccurate data. It could be repetition of the data. There could be misplaced information between the methods and the results section, inappropriate presentation of the data, and overuse and abuse of tables and figures, attempts to draw conclusions, and this should be covered basically in the discussion session. Then coming to the discussion part of it, it is one of the most difficult parts to write, because you have more choices of what to say. Often it should begin with a brief summary of your own findings, which are your main or a primary outcome. You should answer or address the question or hypothesis which was stated by you in your introduction. So basically, we can divide the content of discussion as one, you can have strength of the study, where, for example, the superior methods and the extensive data, whatever you've analyzed. Then you have to give limitations of the study. That is, suppose you have a small sample size, a short follow-up, incomplete data, possible sources of bias, problems with experimental procedures, and if limitations seem unlikely to affect the conclusions, then you can explain why they will not affect your conclusion. And then you have to have the relationship to the finding of other researches, for example, similarities to previous papers which have been published, difference from the previous findings, and possible reasons for similarities as well as differences. And then it is also important that you have to have applications and implications in your discussion. And these are possible uses of the findings in the policy and practices, the relationship of the finding to the theories or models, like do the findings support them, do they refute them, or do they suggest modification? That is, whether your question, whatever you've asked, and your results. So what is their correlation? The other research needed, for example, to address questions still which are unanswered, and to address new questions raised by the findings. So for this, then you have to write that probably we require to do a further research to address these unanswered questions, or probably there are certain new questions which have arisen from the data what we have got, and therefore we now need to prove that. And then coming to the conclusion, it has to be summary of findings and recommendations, and therefore must summarize the whole paper. Purpose should not be of points or reason for research problems, but a synthesis of a key point. And here you should not conclude what other papers you have taken as when you've done your literature review. So this part should not include those conclusions at all. So the conclusion should be basically based depending only on your results. So what are the common mistakes we make? One is repetition of the data presented in the results section, incorrect interpretation of the findings, importance of results inadequately discussed or omitted, conclusions not supported by the findings, irrelevant and faulty discussion points, failure to identify any weaknesses, omissions of key and relevant references, and explanations are too long or they're too verbose. Then coming references, because references is also very, very important, because if you're writing anything in the paper which is referring to a paper already been published, you have to rephrase the sentence, which is very, very important. And then you have to put that particular reference number over there. So that means citing of the references accurately in the text in the format desired by the journal is very, very important. The references must be in a style desired by the journal. That is, you have the Vancouver style, you have the APA style. So whatever the journal wants, your reference should be in that manner. Then you need to give credit to the others for their work. To add credibility to your work by showing that you used valid information sources. It also helps to show how your work is related to the previous work, and it also helps readers to find further information if they require by going through the papers which have been cited in your reference. Acknowledgement again is also very important, because you have to thank the people who helped you with the work but did not make contributions deserving authorship, and sometimes the place where source of financial supports also have to be stated in that. So once all this is done, then what you need to do is you have to format your paper before you submit it for publication. So for this, you have to first decide which journal you want to publish your paper. Then if you have decided which journal you want to publish your paper, then you go to the website of that journal, then you look for the author guidelines. And then, because at times they also will give you the word count, they'll give you what format it is there. So you have to stick to everything what is given in the author guidelines. So you have to stick to the stipulated word count. You have to check for your references, the style of references, and follow the journal's basic instructions and get things right. That is, what type of file you have to submit, what should be the font type and size, the layout, the spacing, the page margins, the numbering, heading style, language style, word count, etc. And also check the journal guidelines for specific sections, example, the title and the abstract. Because now when I'm talking about the JHRS journal, so now though we have indexed in several agencies, now it is up for indexing in the Medline indexing agency. So now I have got a letter where it says that there are certain points, about 30% of the points which they want are not being complied by us when we are taking the when we are publishing our journal. So in this, the abstract, because there are certain people who are writing in one particular way and there are certain another way, and we are just saying that all the points are included, and we are not saying that no, we wanted it in these 5 specifications only. And now, so therefore, now on, when we are accepting our abstracts, we have to see that we will specify and tell the author that they have to write in that. So if you have to get your index, your journal indexed, and also have an impact factor, then it is very important for us that we have to see that the format of the paper, what we receive for publication, should be ideal, and we should send it for peer review only once it is ideal. You have to also make sure that All the in-text citations are included in the reference list. Your reference list has been formatted as per the journal style. In-text citations and references are complete and consistently styled, and prepare accurate tables, figures, and graphs which should be clear and in accordance with the journal instructions, and which will tell us about the file size, the image resolution, etc. So all these have to be kept in mind, and they should be checked. And then there are certain ethics which we have to enter. And this is one is that you have to maintain the authenticity with no fabrication. That is, there should be no plagiarism at all. Then you have to look at the data and not only supporting your hypothesis. Using appropriate statistical procedures is important, and it has to be original. It should not be republishing of the same findings. Then you have to look at the credit, that is citing sources of information and ideas, avoiding excessive use of others' words, observing copyright and obtaining needed permissions. Suppose you have taken a figure from somebody else's paper, you cannot use it just like that. So you have to basically take permission from that author, and then only you can use that figure. And this is done when you're writing a review article. And then it's important to disclose the conflicts of interest. Then once you're totally done and formatted, it's very important that we revise our work again. So basically good writing is largely a matter of good revising. The first revise your writing yourself, then get a feedback from others and revise more. Consider having a mentor or a volunteer or a commercial editor for help if you think you require so. But as far as possible, it's best to write your own papers. Avoid the temptation to keep revising your writing forever. So then, before sending the article for publication, it's mandatory for us to check certain things. So one is instruction on the limits, that is the word count, the tables, the figures, the references and authors, the cost for submission, photographs, reprints, reference style, and copyright form. So this is very, very important to check before you submit your article for publication. Then we will go to the writing style. So it's very important for us to pay attention to the meaning of the words we use, ensuring that we use only words whose meanings we understand, and as far as possible, the words whose meaning others can also understand. So basically, you have to be concise, simple, use active voice, avoid repetition, don't make unsupported statements, define terms when first used, and avoid single sentence paragraphs. And when we are looking at the writing process, it is important that we need to give sufficient time. Yeah, and so you basically have pre-writing, then drafting, revising, editing, and then it goes for publishing. So your first draft is put it away for a few days, because many a times we see that we have done something and then we just get a headache when we open it again. So for a few days, just give rest to our brain from that particular research, whatever you are writing. Then after a few days, you take a hard copy and read, because many a times when you're reading on the computer, you cannot really make out your mistakes. So it's very important that we need to read a hard copy. You ask the colleagues also to review, revise, re-revise, and make it concise. Then make a final draft, and the proofreading should be done before sending it. And then basically you do your own spell checks and don't rely on the computerized spell checks. So basically the skills which are required for success are that, so before the manuscript is submitted, it is best to prepare a checklist and see that all the points are included in it. And today, most journals prefer electronic submissions, and one should avoid sending any hard copies. Then the most important is selecting the right journal for publication. So what are the points you need to keep into consideration when you're selecting the journal? One is the readership and the scope, whether it's local, regional, global, and whatever specialty or general. Because if somebody will submit an obstetric article to a JHRS journal, we will not accept it, because the scope of our journal is only infertility, andrology, and embryology. So therefore, you have to read the scope of the journal when you're sending in your paper. Then you have to look at the style and the structure, that is the indicative title, the limits on the authors, tables, as well as whether they accept or not case reports, because there are many journals who do not accept case reports. And then you also need to look at the acceptance and the rejection rate and check the instructions and the higher the impact and more is the higher rejection. So the acceptance rate of JHRS is only about 23 to 24%. So that's the acceptance rate of JHRS. And therefore in a small time, probably we been able to make an impact factor of 1.8 for our journal. The second thing what we need to see is the timeline. So you have to see which journal reviews fastest and what is the acceptance to publication time. Now again, if I want to index my journal Medline, if my acceptance rate is less than 3 months, then I can really index. It has to be anything more than 3 months. So again, when you have to start indexing your journal in different agencies, then you have to look at what is this. Then you have to look at the indexing as well as the impact factor. So, so what is the importance of that? If it is indexed, it is easily retrievable and it's also required for academic advancements. Electronic submission is most important because it's more convenient, faster and economical, and all journals today have an online submission platform. Then whether it's open access, that is, so that will give us the research impact and wider visibility and reach. So what is open access? That anybody can access the journal. That is called as open access journal, where there are certain journals wherein you can only access them only after you make a payment or unless you're subscribing to that journal. And then you also need to look at the processing fee, because there are some journals which will charge you processing fee, and there are some journals which charge you only once it is accepted, whereas there are some journals which even charge you once you have submitted your article for publication. So then coming to what happens to the article once you have submitted to the journal. So once you're submitted, the editor is going to see, and then if it is out of scope, she is going to outrightly reject the article. Then outright acceptance is usually not done by the editor, because if it is a peer-reviewed journal, it has to be sent to an external reviewer. So when you're sending it to the external reviewer, it is very important to see that the identity of the author, his institute, his city or country is nowhere there, either in the title or it is also not there in the article file anywhere. Second, you have to see that the abstract has to be structured. Then you have to also see that in the material and methods, they have properly written as to how they are chosen their subjects. So that is important. And then you send it for peer review. Once the article has been peer reviewed, the reviewer will send it back to you, and then he would have given his review. So he can give 4 things. 1 is accepted. Second is accept after corrections. Third is he wants to re-review it again. And 4th is that he wants it is rejected. So if it is rejected, you just send it back to the author saying that it is rejected. But if the reviewer wants revision, then you send the paper back to the author to revise. Once the paper is received again after revision, then there are 2 things. One is that if the reviewer has said that if the said changes have been made, then the editor can accept the paper, then you can accept the paper. But if the reviewer says that he has to see the paper again, then you need to resend it to the reviewer, wait for his comments, and then either you accept it or again you send it for re-revision to the author. So peer review plays a very, very vital role, because it ensures that each published article conveys its message as accurately, unambiguously and convincingly as far as possible. So therefore, if you have predatory journal wherein they accept your articles without peer review and you just pay them, then such an article is not considered whenever you apply for any position, because your articles have to be published in a peer reviewed journal and not in a predatory journal. So what do the editors really want? What they want is a high quality research with increase in the impact. So it has to be original and novel research where you can get new values, importance and timelessness. It has to be well designated, well reported and transparent study, which has a high scientific and technical quality, appropriate and clear methods, and sound research and publication ethics, and also logical, engaging, and gives you a useful message with high readability and interest, clear real world relevance. And you have to also look at the impact factor. So what is the impact factor? It is the total number of citations on the total number of articles in those 2 years, and that is going to give you the impact factor. So what does the reviewer want then when he's evaluating a study or paper? So first, what he's going to check is does the trial ask an important question? Is the design of the study doable? Will the study allow proper analysis? Will the report of the study the research? So the reviewer is going to see these 4 things when he reviews a paper. So after peer review, as I told you, the reviewer will say you can accept without any changes. There could be major changes which you have to revise and resubmit for re-review. Minor changes you can accept if certain revisions are carried out properly, and resubmission after revision should be done if new data or analysis has been subjected. And the 5th is that it can be rejected. So then what are the reasons for rejection of the paper? So one is the focus is wrong for the journal, because the manuscript dealing with a different healthcare field or with something completely unrelated to topics covered by the journal has been submitted. It is avoided by actually reading the journal to which the would-be author proposes to submit a manuscript. So therefore, you have to look at the scope of the journal where you're submitting your paper. Then it could be because of incorrect information, wherein some authors submit manuscripts that are not like what the journal publishes. You have probably the format, the style, or the length is not right. Then they are not following the instructions, because every journal will have different instructions to the author, and it is a point-by-point checklist which is given in all journals, and this will assist the author in meeting the journal requirements for each of its categories of publication. And it also includes other requirements such as signature of all authors and permission from the copyright holder of any borrowed material. Yes. Complicated writing, this impairs the reader's ability to grasp and appreciate an author's message. And therefore, it's important that with the scientific writing, the simplest and the most direct statements of the intended message should be made. Then there could be inadequate description of the methods which are being used, wherein it's not an original idea, uncorrectable methodological flaws, selection bias, unpowered studies, and the material and method should be such that the reader should be able to repeat the study if desired. So if the reviewer finds that the material and methods is that any other person who wants to do a similar study can be done, then only he will go ahead and review that paper. So for this study design, the follow should totally. So then what is a design? So if fatal flaws, once a study has been completed, no amount of rewriting of creative data presentation or statistical manipulation can make up for the fact that the study used the wrong model, or the study design was improper and there was improper collection of data, or made too few measurements to permit confident conclusions to be drawn. Then avoiding study design problems which must be dealt with at the time of research when the research is planned, and not when the measurements have all been made and the investigator sits down to write the paper. So this requires a thorough reading of the existing literature on the topic, and by consulting a statistician for the sample size, the units of analysis, and determinants of both clinical importance as well as the statistical significance. Then there could be inadequate or suboptimal reporting of the results, which include results section should be straightforward documentation of what was found. Results should be presented in a logical, consistent order and should contain actual data rather than percentages summary statements, or generalization. Tables and figures may be the most effective way to communicate the findings, and inability to group findings and to convey the overall results without overwhelming the readers with details. Then there also could be over-interpretation of significant findings in small trials, giving incomplete information about analysis with non-significant results in appropriate statistical analysis, statistically significant but not clinically significant results, and analysis conducted by a sponsor of the trial. And then usually such papers are not accepted in peer-reviewed journals. Then the other causes for rejection could be misleading information, captions, titles, text pictures in the article, a weak discussion where you have erroneous or unsupported conclusion, draws conclusion disproportionate to the results, has uncritically accepted statistical results, and interpreted the findings in a manner not concordant with the data reported. Then there could be failure to consider alternative explanations for the result and to acknowledge the study's limitations. There could be weak conclusion which are not objective and specific to that study. And there could be certain ethical issues wherein you require ethical clearance from the institute. Ethics committee is essential for all studies, and absence of which can be a cause of rejection. Written informed consent or consent with the presence of a witness or thumb imprint from the participant is very, very important. Then the most important is lack of originality and plagiarism. And it is an important factor that governs the rejection apart from the technical part of the research paper. The accepted limit for plagiarism is about 20%. Thus, avoiding plagiarism is of utmost importance. If at all you have used certain matter, you have to acknowledge the source you used in the writing. And when paraphrasing, understand the material completely and then write it in your own words. Make sure to reference and cite the reference accurately and avoid salami publications, and become familiar with the basic elements of copyright law. Then the other cause for rejection could be failure to revise. So if the peer reviewer has suggested changes, then before resubmission, it is important to read comments, respond to each comment, and every comment specifically and scientifically, be polite, admit errors, and resubmit within an allotted period of time. And failure to revise and resubmit after peer review again is one of the causes. So when you're revising, you have to carefully consider the referee comments. Not all have made, but need for changes which you have not made. Then you prepare the revised version, revise the manuscript and highlight the changes in the manuscript. Point by point response to all referees' criticism should be made as to what changes are made and what changes are not made. And response may go back to the referee, and therefore you need to convince both the editor as well as referee. So this is how in our journal we get the comments. So when you're resubmitting, you have to give a detailed letter to the editor listing the points raised by the reviewer, that these are the comments by the reviewer, and each of them how you have addressed. So what you have given. So whether you have used this thing, whether you have added, you have not changed, and then here you have to give where the changes have been made. And therefore, it is best, most of the journals accept a revised article only if a comment file is received in this manner. If they just write everything and send, it is again sent back to them, because it is very easy for a referee or a reviewer to just see this, whether the changes are made or not, and then just they go to that page and they see whether the changes have been made or not. So there are certain reasons for outright rejection. So one of them is poor methodology, inadequate results, poor presentation, inappropriate statistical analysis, weak discussion, lack of originality, as well as a weak conclusion. So what you should do to succeed, that many a times you might think, oh, it's going to be rejected, so why publish? But it's very, very important that you have to publish. So you need to know what the editors want, the basics of writing a paper, the rudiments of the style, peer review process has to be known, authorship and contributorship should be known, conflicts of interest, redundant publication, and good practice in publishing. So there are certain people who send a paper, and then if it's not accepted, some people know me, okay, I'm the editor, so they'll call me and they'll say why it's not accepted. But to tell you the truth, I don't know also whose paper that is, because I never look at it, because I feel I should be just and I don't review the papers at all. So they're totally peer reviewed. So in our journal, basically we send it to 10 reviewers. 5 of them are national and 5 of them are international. So once you send it to 10 people, at least you get a reply from about 4 to 5 people. And therefore, this gives more credibility to the article which has been accepted. So this is what I was telling you. So why we should publish even if there are chances of rejection? One is because you have something important to say, to change the practice, to promote thought or debate, to allow examination of your work, for career advancement, because now certain government rules are there that you have to have certain number of publications if you have to be promoted, and also for educational purpose. So the take home messages is that the first thing what I would like to discuss is the key elements of a good research. One is conception. What is conception? Turning idea into a research question, which has clear research aim, rationale, and hypothesis. Then you need to design this research. And for this, you have to consult a statistician, because you have to develop an appropriate design to answer the question, adequate sample size, and steps to reduce the bias. So you need to know what the sample size is, and you also need to know what are the statistical formulas you're going to use in your research. Then is the execution, wherein you have participant recruitments and consent forms, good clinical practice conduct, research integrity and research integrity principles. Then you need to do analysis, which should be as per the statistical analysis plan. So you have to plan what statistics you're going to use initially, and not that when you finish collecting all the data, then you decide what statistical analysis you're going to do. Then you should avoid any data fabrication and falsification. And when you're publishing and reporting, the goal should be to publish research findings in a usable form, which will not mislead or allow replication of the results. Then what happens once it is submitted to the journal? So the first assessment is by the editor, who does the article fit into the journal's aim, scope, and is it of acceptable quality. If it is no, it is just rejected, or at times you can tell them to make some technical modifications and resend it again. If it is yes, then the article is sent to the reviewer for assessing. Then you check, once it comes from the reviewer, you need to check for significance, novelty, presentation, evidence, reasoning, the theory, experimental design, data validation, organization. So all these things. Recommendations to the editor. The editor then makes a decision, and then this decision is then informed to the author. So if there are minor or major revisions, it has to be sent back to the author to revise and resubmit. And if there are no revisions required, then it is accepted by the author. So the common deficiencies in the methods, results, and discussion section prevent the initial acceptance for publication, but are potentially amendable to the corrections. The most serious are fundamental defects in the study design, which, although correctable at the inception of a project, often doom the paper once the study has been completed. Thus, most problems listed are potentially fixable, except the problem of a poor study design. So if your study design is poor, whatever changes you make, this paper of yours is not going to get published. And therefore, the most important thing before you start your research is your study design. So basically, the clinical research and its publication is just like a circus where you have to go up and down. And therefore, you have to look before you leap to avoid errors. So your study, the literature review, and the concepts have to be very, very clear to have a very good publication. And therefore, a clear, concise, simple, and easy to read paper submitted to the right journal as per the instructions provided by the journal is the essence for acceptance. One must also remember that a journal will not accept articles that lie outside its subject area. Writing for publication can be a challenging but yet a satisfying endeavor. I thank you all. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer. Shall
Thank
we
you.
go?
Madam, there are a few questions before we go ahead for the...
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a fantastic, well-structured presentation about how to publish and what are the main reasons for rejection of a paper. So there are a few questions which have come online. Should we discuss before we go ahead, madam?
Yeah, I think we'll do that.
I think
Yeah.
Dr.
So first was if
Dr.
yes,
Ameya has requested, please share your email ID for specific communication.
Okay. My email ID is there with Sachin, so I think he can share it.
I'll share it on the group. Yeah, fine. So is JHRH indexed and the IF factor you already mentioned? Can one paper be submitted?
It is indexed in 7. So we have got it indexed within 2 years of starting our journal in PubMed. It's also indexed in Scopus, and it's also indexed in other agencies which are there. We have indexed in total about 9 of them, out of which the most important what we have indexed is the PubMed and the Scopus. And now we are in for the Medline indexing.
Okay, fine. And can one paper be submitted to multiple journals?
No.
Okay. Is ethics review board different in each city or is it common across the country?
No. Ethics review board is in your own institute, or you can have 3 or 4 institutes together which form a review board.
No, like if say we are private practitioners, we are not attached to any institute, and
you can have your own ethics committee.
We can have our own ethics committee.
Yes.
Okay, so that is acceptable.
Yeah.
Okay. Then what is the cost of submission that you have mentioned? Means you have to pay for our regular journals, because I'm aware about those predatory journals.
Yeah, regular journal we don't take any money. For JHRS we don't take, and even for the TOFJ we don't take any money. Many journals don't take, but some journal now actually initially even fertility, sterility, and human reproduction used to not take any money, but now they don't take for submission. But if your article is accepted for publication, then they take what is called as the article processing charges, APC. Okay.
Sir, you want to ask some questions?
Yeah, Dr. Ekika Singh she wants to ask which statistical analysis to use.
No, each it depends upon what paper it is, and therefore you need to go to a statistician, tell him that this is what you want, and then he will tell you which statistical formula or what we need to use. It's not fixed that you should use this only. No, it depends upon what type of data. It's diagnostic, it is prognostic, or it is an intervention. So the statistical formula what is used is totally different for all.
So further to this, he wants to ask, are footnotes and appendix a must? Footnotes and appendix a must?
Yes, most of them we write the footnote, whatever is there, that what are the shortcomings and everything, and whether what we are suggesting. So that is a must. And then even this thing also is the acknowledgement. And then if you have any extra tables, then only you need to put. But that has to be there.
Dr. Riddhi Doshi wants to ask, what are the prerequisites to become a peer reviewer?
As long as you have had some publications yourself, and you have or you have this thing to understand what is there in the journal. I mean, what has been presented, you can become a peer reviewer.
Dr. Anupama Kutel, can we send it to multiple journals? No, that has been answered. What is the Ekika Singh further he wants to ask, what is meant by logistic regression?
Logistic regression is a type of statistical analysis.
Okay.
So you have different types. So this is one type.
Okay. What is meant by structured and unstructured abstract?
So that's what I showed. A structured abstract is which will tell you object, the setting, the material and methods, results, and conclusion. Okay. That's a structured abstract.
Okay. Can retrospective study also have some impact as prospective study?
Very less. A retrospective study has a lesser impact as compared to a prospective study.
And the others are Dr. Riddhi is telling superb lecture, madam. Asima is saying fantabulous presentation. Thank you, madam. They are all thanking you, madam. And Dr. Rana wants to ask, do all journals mention the article processing time? I mean, sometimes the journal take a very long time.
Sometimes we take long also, na? Because see, I'm telling you about my journal itself. Is sometimes I get a lot of articles from this Iran, and basically these are on male infertility and they're on rats. So sometimes when I send it to the reviewers, nobody reviews those articles. So I cannot accept an article which has not been reviewed because ours is a peer-reviewed journal, and therefore, I mean, it might take time. And then many a times I have sent papers for technical modification more than 10 times. They don't understand what we are saying, that what should not be there. Though we say that the name of the author and all should be, again they'll resubmit it, again it will have that. Again they'll have. So it is that time. No? So it is also the technical modification, the time taken for the review. Then again, once the reviewer sends it back, the time taken by them for revising and sending it to us. Then again we send it to the reviewer, and again we get it back. So it all totally depends on that. But for a journal to be in Medline indexing agency, we have to have that time as more than 3 months.
Okay, madam. Dr. Lad wants to ask, if we have done study in different institution and now working in different institution and want to publish paper, then what will be the name of affiliation institution name?
No, so the affiliation has to be from where the study has been conducted.
Okay.
No, I mean, she can write her affiliation, whatever it is, but she has to say that the study has been conducted in that particular place, because she will have to acknowledge that place for her study. So even when you're doing your acknowledgement, when you're submitting the paper, you cannot write that I'm acknowledging so and so. So you can just write that I'm acknowledging all the people who have helped me. But once your paper is accepted, then you can put your names.
Dr. Rana is
acknowledge.
Dr. Rana is asking, are there freelancer biostatistician who can help in data analysis? I think yes.
Yeah, I think yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Sandesh Kade is asking, tell more about p-value.
No, so p-value basically is a method of seeing whether whatever your study is done is statistically significant or not. If it is less than 0.05, it is statistically significant. If it is more than that, it is not statistically significant. So there's a formula for calculating the p-value. So during my days when I was in Vadia and I was in KEM, we used to do it all by hand. Now you have all ready made. You just put your data, which is there in Excel. You put it in you have so many softwares, and it will calculate the p-value for you.
And Dr. Rana is asking, are there any ethics committee that private practitioner can approach, and what is the minimum requirement of forming this ethics committee?
You should have 2 to 3 doctors. Then you should have a lawyer. You should have a social worker, and you should have one representation from the lay public. So these are the minimum requirements.
Dr. Ganpat Sawant is online.
Yeah, आवाज कमी कर जरा.
Yes, please. Dr. Ganpat Sawant, over to you.
हाँ, Madhuri madam, that was a nice presentation, and Rana actually asked that question about the ethical committee. And I was there in DY Patil, but in this now no more I am with the DY Patil at the moment. Now ethical committee for a private practitioner, it really becomes very difficult. And as you said,
no, but then what can happen is, now I have my ethical committee along with DY, but we have many ethical committee. They present the data to us. And then our ethical committee takes into account, because it is a DCGI registered ethics committee. So we say if it can be approved or not, and then we take the number from the DCGI and we give it to the person. So you can always use somebody else's ethics committee, but you need to say that you've used that ethics committee.
Yes, madam. Now in that case, the articles related to your subject will be accepted. But now, if you see the group which is involved with general obstetricians, gynecologists, an ethical committee has to have a expert from that field. Yes. And it's not necessarily only expert, but there are statisticians, there are lawyers, there's NGOs, there are bio.
Those all should be there.
People are involved.
There's no need of a statistician to be there. But you have to have one from whichever subject you are there, and a non-subject person.
Okay, so in short, what I want to say is, can we take a help of any pharma company's ethical committee
No,
Or
you cannot. You cannot.
okay, or for Foxy, I think has an ethical committee.
You can take their help.
Okay. And now the another few questions which I had, which for us a practicing people or a new beginners,
Hmm.
when we want to publish or present something,
Hmm.
what you are explaining is wonderful and it should be inculcated in our PG programs. But
Yeah.
today also I fail to understand this concept of impact factor. In the sense, can you explain in a simple language what is
Yeah.
this
So
impact
simple.
factor?
See,
Yeah,
a
two, three things. I'll ask together so that impact factor is one.
Huh.
Then we always talk about this index journal. Now,
Hmm.
how does this journal becomes index and what is the, we know it's more valued, index journal is more valued, is more respected, but how does it become and how does index journal mean? And third thing is we say peer review. So this peer review, so these three definitions in the simplest format by which we can understand and at least we come to know what is it.
Yeah. So peer review basically is a journal where the editor does not have any role to play in the acceptance or rejection of an article. It is sent to a third person who doesn't know, because therefore we say that there should be no identity of the author, of the institute, of the city or the country anywhere in the title or in the article file, because it has to be totally blinded. So
Okay.
this is called as a peer review, wherein you are sending it to a third person who
So
doesn't
it's
know
the one
anything.
individual or multiple individuals it is sent to?
That's what I was telling. In JHRS, I sent to 10 people, out of which
Okay.
5 are national, 5 are international. So
Okay.
if I send to 10 people, I will get a review at least from 5 to 6 of them. That is why.
Okay.
All
Okay.
of them don't review the review the articles to whomever
Okay.
you send to. It's like,
Okay.
then
Then other
second
two.
is indexed. Indexed.
Yeah.
So there are certain criteria for a journal to be indexed, like whether it's produced in proper time, whether it has a particular number of articles, whether it has more original papers and less number of case reports. And that's what I said. Now we are trying to index JHRS and Medline indexing agencies, but we are at default in 30% of whatever they want. So unless I fulfill those 30% of the things which my journal is not maintaining, I cannot be considered also for indexing over there. So when it was sent for indexing, they're sent that these things I'm not been following, so I need to follow them if I want my journal to be indexed there.
So who puts criteria of we need to have so many whatever?
The agency has it. The PubMed has its own for being indexed PubMed. The SOCM has its own. Then Scopus has its own. The Medline has its own. It's like that.
Okay.
Each indexing agency has its own.
Okay.
And the third is impact factor. So impact factor depends upon the citations of your articles by other authors. So basically it is the number of articles cited divided by the total articles you have received in that period of time. So that will give us.
Can you 1 second? Can you say 1 or 2 lines about the citation in simplest format?
No, that I have written an article and somebody else is writing something related to the same subject, and he has cited my article in his article. That is called a citation.
Okay, quoted your article in that.
Yes, yes.
So coming back to impact factor now, there's a formula.
That's what I said. It is total number of citations divided by the total number of articles received by the journal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so these are some of the basic questions, and we keep on talking these words, but difficult to grasp. That's why I had to ask this. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Madam Sachin here. There are a few questions which were there, which few people have asked. One is, if I'm say publishing a paper on luteal phase support. Hello.
Yeah.
And one of my colleague has unpublished data, but he is going to publish it, or it is still planning to be published. Means it's unpublished data. It is submitted for publication. Can I use that as a reference or citation?
You cannot use it as a citation, but you can just write in back there it's unpublished data.
Unpublished data. Okay. Even though if it is accepted but not published.
But what happens is most of the journals don't accept somebody else's unpublished data, but they accept your own unpublished data.
Okay. Then second
Suppose
is
I'm
when,
publishing. So if I have an unpublished data, I can write my unpublished data, but I cannot
okay,
write
okay.
somebody else's unpublished.
Somebody else is unpublished unless it's published.
Yes.
Okay. What is the importance of the name order? The first name, the second name, and the last name. All have same equivalence, or is
No,
there
so
any?
any journal, only the first and the second name are considered as the main authors.
Okay.
So basically, who's done the maximum work will come as the first name.
Okay. And the second name is
Maybe
what?
the one who has done second most work for the paper.
Okay. And the last name in normally used to be
That is-
the HOD's name. So is that
Yeah,
important?
so that so the credit will go only to the first two authors. It doesn't go to
The
the
first two authors. Okay. And one of the other question is that if I am a teacher and my student has done a thesis,
Hmm.
but is not ready to publish for whatever reason and has left the institute,
Hmm.
and it's my student, if I want to publish that data, so
So she
how
has
do I
to
go?
take permission from that person.
I have to take the permission from the student.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And the first name will be mine or the student's?
If you have written all the other things, you can put your name as first, but you need to write that the study has been done by the student. But if the student has written, it has to be hers. But if she is not ready to write, then whatever modifications you make, because a thesis cannot be published as a paper, so you will need to make modifications in that. So if you
Got
have
it.
made modifications and you have written the final formatted paper, then you can put your name as the first paper.
Thank you so much, madam. Rajesh sir, on to you.
Yeah. Dr. Ekika Singh is online. Please ask the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, thank you, madam, for such a descriptive and for such a descriptive explanation about the writing abstract and the paper. Ma'am, I just want to ask you one thing. I really want to do prospective studies and prospective trials, but I really don't have an ethical committee. So, is there anyone whom I can approach and give my study structure and?
That's why I'm saying the Foxy has its own ethical committee. So you can
Hello?
Foxy has its own ethical committee. So you can take permission from the Foxy ethical committee. Or you see whichever place you are in.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear?
Yes, ma'am. Just now I can hear. Yeah.
So actually Foxy has its ethical committee, but I'm not sure whether if you take permission from that ethical committee, you can publish in any other journal. That I'm not very sure
Okay.
about. But
Okay.
whichever place you're practicing in, most hospitals have an ethics committee. So you can always approach them and you say that I want to submit this paper for an ethics committee approval, and you can
So
do
for that, I can approach any government institution also, and if I know them and I can show them and convince them.
No,
if they
but you
can-
have to get that DCGI letter that it has
Okay. Okay.
been approved. That's
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
So that was all, madam, I think.
yeah. So
All
shall
the
I send
questions.
you want me to show the papers?
Sir,
Yes,
Dr.
madam.
Sandesh Khade wants to ask a few questions.
Huh.
If you can just unmute
Yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah. No
Yeah.
problem.
Yes. Dr. Sandesh, no? Just a minute.
Sandesh Khade, yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yes, please tell him to raise the hand.
Dr. Sandesh, please, can you raise the hand?
No, I found out.
Can you
No
hear
problem.
me?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Dr. Sandesh, tell me.
Sometimes we read that in the discussion or in the findings, they say that these numbers are very less. And
Yeah, that's what yesterday I did speak. I don't know if you were there yesterday.
Yeah. But
So
how
yes.
do you decide? Suppose I want to do a research on endometriosis, then how many cases should I include? Does it
Yeah, that's
depend upon the pathology or the population, or how you tell me that these numbers have to be
So
included?
that's
in
why I showed you now how to calculate the sample size. So that sample size has to be that much. Whatever the sample size comes. So that will depend either on your pilot study or it will depend on any other study which has been there, and what you are expecting different from your study, that will give you the effect size, and then with the total number of population and the 95% confidence interval and the other things, that formula is there, you calculate that sample size. So
So it's
that
always
has to be
better to
sample
do
size.
this homework before you start any study.
Yes. You cannot start a study without having a sample size.
Okay, otherwise, that's what we usually find. They comment that the numbers are too less to be applied in a journal.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's a fantastic presentation. I think this lockdown, this has been the most worthy of the webinars I have attended. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we'll go to the two papers.
Yeah, madam.
Yeah. I'll just share. Can I see it? Can you see it?
No,
No,
madam.
only
It's
thank
not
you
yet.
slide is in. Thank you slide is in.
Okay, I'll just close this bit. Can you
Yes,
see
we can
now?
see, madam.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I've chosen two papers on hysteroscopy, whether it should be done before IVF or not, in a patient who does not have any symptoms. Okay. So this was one study which all of us know is the INSIGHT trial, which looked at hysteroscopy before IVF, whether it really makes a difference or not. And it was a randomized multi-centric trial. So the two advantages, it was a randomized trial. Second, it was a multi-centric trial. That is, it was not done in one place. So they have got from all over, they have got results. So it's not biased, that is only not pertaining to that particular country or place. So it has been a multi-centric trial. And similarly, we had a trophy trial, again, which was on hysteroscopy before IVF in patients who have had recurrent implantation failure. And we know that both of them were not, have shown that there is no benefit of doing hysteroscopy before in vitro fertilization. So basically, you can see that this was a multi-centric trial, and so they have looked at the evidence before the study, and then they have said that this has added value, saying that it's not useful, and they have also given implications of all the available evidence which has been done, which again says that even if you compare several papers, it says that it has not been of any benefit. And you can see it's right from the US, European countries to Australia and to some Asian countries. It has other researchers from there. So if you see, they had a very good number of cases. So they had 750 patients whom they had randomized, and whatever they had taken to 373 and 377, 4 were excluded, and therefore they did 355 and 358, and it was completely followed up for 18 months period. So they've given enough time for follow-up. And you can see over here, the age was, there was nothing significant, and the duration also was similar. So everything was quite similar in both the groups. And if you look at the analysis here, also pregnancy rate every cycle it is. I mean, so you can see that the maximum was seen in the first cycle, then in the second and third, it was almost similar, and afterwards it keeps on reducing. And then here, the method of conception, they have also looked at natural conceptions over here after they've done the hysteroscopy, and when they have not done the hysteroscopy and the patient was waiting for IVF, and you can see that they have had equal number of cases, and they have also calculated the time to pregnancy leading to live birth rate. Suppose, because many a times we see, okay, we've done a hysteroscopy, and they said that probably it acts like the endometrial scratch, wherein it releases the cytokines and the interleukins if it's done in the cycle preceding the IVF, and therefore it increases the pregnancy rate. There were several papers which came out on endometrial scratch, and therefore this is very important again, time to pregnancy, this thing. And we can see over here that again there was no difference between the two groups. So that endometrial scratch does not work. So they have also looked at that factor, whether it is affecting or not. So you can see that the time to pregnancy was same in both of them. And then if you look at the clinical pregnancy rate and the live birth rate, you can see that there are no differences. So it has been very well analyzed. And therefore, we can say that this has got a very, it's a high quality evidence. So you can say it is A or it is 4 stars. Okay. And then they have also, this is the time to pregnancy, that's a Mayer-Kepler curve, and you can see that there is no difference in the time to pregnancy. On the contrary, you can see the time to pregnancy is a little more in patients who have undergone hysteroscopy. So this is understood. Shall I go to the next paper?
Yes, ma'am.
This is a high quality paper. So we've got everything in it, and therefore we say that it's a high quality paper. Then I'll go to the other one. Can you see? Okay. So this was also another paper which was published, and it looked at the routine hysteroscopy prior to IVF ICSI alone, IVF to ICSI versus ICSI alone in patients with normal transvaginal ultrasound. It was also in RCT. Again, they also had they had done a computer generated randomization, but they had less number of patients, and out of them they had total analysis of 97 and 96 patients. And when we look at the results, we can see that most of them were younger age group, and therefore probably the pregnancy rates were quite high if you look at the pregnancy rates. And then if you look at the hysteroscopy findings, almost 55% had normal, whereas you can see that there were almost 45% of the patients did have some abnormal uterine pathology. So then we cannot say that because of hysteroscopy, the patient had a better pregnancy rate, because 45% had additional factors which were corrected because of your hysteroscopy. And they have also done laparoscopy in all the patients, though it might not be required, because the disconnection of hydrosalpinx was done only in 3 and 1, that is total 4 patients. And that's the only indication where we really have to do a laparoscopy if the patient has to go for IVF. And then the other fallacy in this was they have transferred 3 embryos. So this is a fallacy. And if you look at the pregnancy outcome, they've said that it is statistically significant because they had statistically more number of patients who conceived after doing a hysteroscopy without a hysteroscopy. Okay. But then there were so many fallacies, whatever I've said, and therefore this paper is not of good quality, and therefore it has its own limitations. Fine. Anybody want? I think who wanted that person only is not there. I think on even that who wanted the ROC curve, na? I think some Jani or somebody wanted. I think he was not there, na, today.
I have to go through the list. Madam, I want to ask something.
Yeah.
What is the most suitable, convenient, and the best economical way to have the full access to the very good index journals across the world? What I mean, best practical way, how to, what to subscribe, and I mean, you know, because see, we
6 journals.
Sorry, madam.
I subscribe to 6 journals, international.
Sorry,
So,
you subscribe
to 6 journals.
6 journal. Okay. Individually. So you are subscribed individually, madam.
Yes.
Not through elsewhere or something like that.
No, individual means whichever journal. Like now, Oxford journals are subscribed to 3 of them. One is Human Reproduction Update, and Molecular Human Reproduction. And their Human Reproduction Open is anyway an open access journal, so that anybody can access. Then RBM Online, that's the most costliest journal, which it costs more than $600 euros per year. That's the costliest one, the RBM Online. Then to Human Genetics, and then to Fertility Sterility. And I also subscribe to JCM, that is Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolic Disorders. And now because I'm on the editorial board, they have 5 total journals. So now I can access all the 5 journals.
So through association, we cannot have institutional access, and can we share to our members?
Actually, ICSAR did try, but then it did not work.
Okay.
We did try for fertility preservation and for human reproduction, but it did not work. Because the cost of Human Reproduction Update is very, very high as compared to human reproduction. And the impact factor of Human Reproduction Update is 10. Whereas that of human reproduction is 4.6.
Oh.
And Human Reproduction Update is bi-monthly. It's only 6 issues. But still, its subscription rate is higher, because they publish only, most of them publish only the review articles and RCTs.
So according to your opinion, madam, suppose for infertility, which journal do you rank the best, who are publishing the best quality papers, Fertility Sterility or Human Reproduction Updates?
RBM Online and RBM online and human reproduction update.
So you will rank fertility sterility third among these three journals.
Yes.
That's important thing, sir. Important to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other
Sir,
question?
Dr. Sandesh Kade has asked one question to Madam. Is there a minimum number of patients that should be enrolled for a multicentric trial?
Yeah, it's pre-decided, na?
Okay.
And
Or with
it
the
will be decided
statistics.
the statistician will tell what sample size is required. And therefore, depending on that, they will decide. Because there were so many papers which have already been published on hysteroscopy and also on endometrial scratch. So considering all those papers they have taken, and they wanted to show this is a non-inferiority trial, because it's showing that basically there's no difference between hysteroscopy and non-hysteroscopy. Okay, so it's not a superiority trial. So then you need to see what number you want to look at the population and the population you take, and whatever data percentage of more pregnancies they've got, they take into consideration, and then they've developed that sample size.
Okay, all right, fine. Thank you so very much, Madam.
Yeah.
Rajesh sir, off to you.
Yeah. It was very nice of you, Madam, to brief us a very difficult subject. And in a very short duration, we came to know a lot of things. And it's very encouraging to, we keep reading, but then to publish, study, and to initiate the efforts for publishing, it's something today onwards, I think we will have that stimulus to do something for that in the research field. Thank you very much.
So initially what I feel is, for everybody, it's not possible to do a prospective study. So at the initial stages, what I feel, you all can always do a retrospective study. So I don't know that whether most clinics keep the records or they do not keep the records. So if you have the records, it's very easy for you to go and do a prospective, retrospective study. So whoever has not published papers, first you try to do a retrospective study. So it may not carry that much weightage, but you have done it. And then once you get used to doing publishing a retrospective study, you publish 1, 2, and then you go on to do a prospective study. That is my way of telling everybody who is not yet published anything.
Yes.
Madam, sir, a question to Madam. Madam, if we want to publish a retrospective study, for that also an ethics board clearance is required, or
No,
for that is
not required. Only a
okay? So okay, fine, all right. Yeah, thank you so much.
Not required for that.
Right, madam.
So that was all, Madam. I think no more question from anybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
It was really wonderful to have you with us for 2 sessions. And we are definitely looking forward whenever you get time, and if you find
I can always spare time in the afternoon anytime, even when I'm practicing, because afternoon I don't
that's
practice.
a great thing, madam. That's a great thing. We will communicate. We'll communicate with you regarding your area of interest primarily.
I can talk on anything in infertility under the earth.
That's a great day, madam.
So I have learned embryology, so I do embryology also. So I have no issues in talking on anything.
So me and Sachin will keep disturbing you, madam.
Not an issue, not an issue. Always welcome.
Yeah,
for me, learning and teaching is my passion in life. That's all I do.
I know. I was knowing it, but then today I was knowing it, madam. But today, since last 2 days, I have realized it.
Yeah. Okay.
Madam, your email ID is drmadhuri.patil59@gmail.com, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all are unmuted. You can express your feelings, Dr. Madhuri, madam.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
माझे दोन्ही स्टडीजला एथिकल नियोजन.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
फार 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 अत्यंत डीपली